Welcome to my podcast From Chaos to Peace with Conny. I am Conny Graf and your host, and I will explore with you how a few minutes a day can keep the chaos away. And with chaos, we're talking about the physical, digital, social, financial, mental, emotional, and spiritual clutter that can accumulate in our life and business. In every episode, I want to make you aware how clutter is so much more than you think, how it affects your finances, and how clearing your clutter leads to more time, more money, and more peace. Let's go. Well, hello, my friend. Welcome to the podcast. I am Conny Graf, your host. Thank you so much for allowing me back into your ears. So today, you hear part 2 of my conversation with Putman. And I really suggest, if you haven't heard part 1 yet, to go back and listen to that one first. Listen to his story on how he moved from chaos to peace before you listen to this part 2. Because in part 1, Evan talked about a specific adventure in his younger years that set the stage to what he's doing now. Why he stepped away from a very successful business to focus more on himself and to be a better father, husband, and human, which led to way more peace in his life. And then he shared the exact steps he took to make this journey from chaos to peace possible. Now, in part 2, Evans talks about how his newfound peace brought even more success to him and his business. When and how he gets ideas for his programs like the Podcast ATM business model, the Infinite Impact Method, the Servepreneur Blueprint, and the Podcast Profits Goal. And what the biggest mistakes podcasting entrepreneurs make when it comes to growing their audience. So again, make sure you listen to part 1 first. That sets the stage and talks about how he ended up where he is now. And then dive into this part 2, which is very juicy and helps you find your own peace in your business and grow your audience of your podcast. Without further ado, let's jump into part 2 with Putman. I would also be interested, now you started then your new business. And so let's talk a bit about that. So what did you start and how is it, because you're very successful, how did it lead you and what are you doing now?
Yeah, well, it's sort of morphed into multiple ways, but one of the first thing I did was I was like, okay, I got sort of good at creating, helping business owners connect their business to their podcast, let their podcast be the engine that drives their business, right? That grow their audience, get leads, get sales. So I started teaching that to a lot of people. I partnered up, which one thing that I've learned over time is to ask for help. I think that's been a big growth thing for me, right? Mm-hmm. Don't think like you can do it all. And if there's other people out there that have superpowers, combine your superpowers. We can do so much better when we collaborate and share, right? So instead of trying to do everything myself, I found someone who was in the podcast space, who had an agency and did management and all the things that I didn't do. And I brought my stuff to the table and we combined, and that really helped us both grow immensely. And it helped me get in front of so many new people, so many heart-centered entrepreneurs. We often say that we would work with people who had big positive messages and missions, who were out to create more impact and wanted to change the world. And it put me in that space with all those people. So that was part of it. That was it with Podcast Sales Machine. I don't know if that's what you were referring to, but that was the first sort of big step in the business. And then from there, it's expanded a little bit to different things, but I've basically continued to fall back on the podcasting space because, to me, one thing that happened in meditation was this came to me, what I call the Infinite Impact Method, which sort of came to me during that time that I was spending time meditating. And I don't know if anybody's if anybody's ever experienced flow before, right? Like if you're an athlete or you've done something where it just feels like time stands still and everything's working out perfect. I used to play basketball, and I remember there were times where it was like I could throw the ball up with my eyes closed over the back of my head and it would still go in. I'm like, how is this possibly happening? But it was during that meditation, it felt like that. And I remember jumping up, running in my office that I'm in now. For those that can't see it, I got a whiteboard over here, and I started mapping out this whole business model. And I was teaching it. So I wasn't just writing it. I was like teaching it to the blinds. I was staring straight ahead. There was nobody there, but yet it felt like there were like thousands of people there. Right. It was almost like I was in this visual dream where I was doing it and just wrote it. But this entire infinite impact method, I call it, came out. And part of the podcasting is like something that fits in there, because the infinite impact method, there's 4 main pillars. And these are like these words, they came, I often say they came through me, not from me. Right. But the words were rise, shine, simplify, and serve. So everything I teach in my business now, like whether it's through the podcast profit school, which I have now, through that business model, if it's through my event consulting and virtual events side that I do, it all runs through the same, people don't really see this because I don't talk about it a lot, but in my mind, it runs through these same 4 pillars, because the first step is always, you must rise into your highest authentic self. You have to be that person, right? You have to have the belief that you can do the thing you wish to do. So that's like the first part. I help people believe in themselves. I help people rise into their highest authentic self. Well, once you do that, you need to shine, which was the second part, to attract and affect those you're called to serve. Right? If you keep it all inside and you don't share your talents or your gifts, then one, they'll be taken away from you, but you'll also feel miserable. At least I did many years of my life, and I was sort of in the background. I felt, stressed and constrained. So that's part of what I love about podcasting, is I help people shine their message and their mission to attract and affect through podcasting. And then the next part for me is the simplify, which it's simplify to take a quantum leap. I started realizing, I was like, you can take more out of what you're doing and go farther, faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In business and in life.
Yeah.
And then the last part is serve, to change lives, because I believe everything is to change lives. So if you look at it in business context, I teach people how to believe in themselves, how to get their message and mission out, whether it's through podcasting, through speaking at virtual events. I simplify by giving them a simple business model that's usually only like 2 or 3 steps to get a massive growth in their business. And then the whole goal at the end is I teach them how to serve other people by creating offers and programs that are designed to give forward, to help that person change their life versus just collecting a paycheck. So to me, that's like the underlying principles behind anything I ever launch now. I look at it from that perspective. It's like, okay, how does this fit into that infinite impact method that came to me in the middle of meditation? So it's one of the things that I was grateful for. And that's the other thing I left out. Another big step in that morning routine is just to be grateful. Take some time to write down a few things you're grateful for.
Yeah. 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 It's very powerful. Also, like literally feeling grateful for the things you have, and not just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm grateful, but it's a lot of people miss that part. But all I could think about when you were talking, remember in the beginning when I asked you a question and you said, oh, my future, and then you said, oh no, we want to talk about the past, but you actually had a preview of your future when you had this download, right? So now I know why you said that. And I hear this a lot from people, that they get this either in the shower or in very unrelated situations. They get some kind of a download that they then have to run somewhere and start writing it down, that they can catch it all, right? So that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I believe too, like it's all a process of, like you mentioned earlier, the slowing down, right? The getting quiet so that voice can speak to you.
Exactly.
To me, I mean, 3 o'clock, 3:15 in the morning. I'm up every morning, and I don't get up. But I wake up
Mm.
and I have answers a lot of times to like
Mm-hmm.
just a problem or something. And so I've gotten to where I have to keep like a little notebook next to me. I have to write it down. I
Mm-hmm.
close it and then I'm like, thank you for giving me that answer. I appreciate it. Now I'm going back to sleep so
Yeah.
we can quit talking.
So do
So I'm
you
actually talking to this
Well,
imaginary
yeah, why
self,
not?
right?
Why not?
So
So do you
uh,
wake up on your own, or you're setting an alarm, or how are you doing it?
no, I just wake up on
Or
my
you
own.
just
It's
wake?
generally at
'Cause
that time. Yeah.
yeah, it's so funny because lately I wake up around 2:30 all the time. So
Hmm. Well, and it's
I
funny
don't know.
because I literally will just be sitting there and it's like, you should do this to fix this, right? And it's
Uh-huh.
like, oh my gosh, I've been stressed out, not stressed out, but trying to solve this problem. Now all
Yes.
of a sudden it just shows up. So I just make sure to write it down now, because when it first started, when I first would do this, I wouldn't write things down. I wouldn't like sort of close the loop, and then I just lay there and couldn't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But now that I take it, I say, I'm grateful for you giving me that answer. Now I'm going back to bed now. Is that
Yeah.
okay? So I promise I will do this tomorrow when I get up, but I'm going back to sleep now.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
that's the only way I can go back to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's beautiful. So I will pay attention because maybe there's somebody knocking on my door too and wants to tell me
Hmm.
something. Because so I wanted to ask you something before I let you go. Since you were so successful with your first partner and also now in the podcasting world, and I'm having a podcast, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be on. So, what is the biggest mistake that we podcasters do when it comes to growing an audience? Because I think that's what you were good at. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to build this huge business around the podcast.
Yeah. And one thing, what I've discovered over time through all the different business iterations is audience is huge. I don't think enough people they talk about like the most valuable thing is, time or this or that. And I'm like, well,
Mhm,
one of the most valuable things you can have is an audience, because
mhm,
without that audience, you can't get leads, you can't get sales,
mhm,
you can't get the rest of it. So, to answer your question, the thing that, that I learned, and what I like to share with people, it's funny because I share this analogy. Um, I'll just use Christmas, for example. If it's a lot of people, maybe you don't celebrate Christmas, that's okay. But maybe you've probably seen a picture of a Christmas tree with all the presents wrapped up all nice and pretty underneath it. And I always
mhm,
explain that. I'm like, when I go back and explain to people, like what I call it now our podcast ATM model. Um, but I explain it to them, it looks like that picture,
mhm,
right? It looks like the big, beautiful wrapped gift. Everything's nice and perfect. But if you just went to that room, like down the hallway, and opened up the door, and you see the chaos of the wrapping paper and the tape and the boxes all over, that the trash, that's what it really looked like doing it. So we
mhm,
learned, and I'm sharing this because I want people to give yourself permission to listen to your intuition and try stuff that's different,
mhm,
because we just, you know, I think I was blessed in a way that when I said, hey, when I told Pat, he asked me, you're going to help me grow the podcast, right? And I said, yes. Then I went home, like, how the heck am I going to help grow this podcast? But I looked at it differently. So the thing that we did differently was we came to the approach of, we were very proactive, and we focused, and because of necessity, because it was me and nobody else to help at first, I had to figure out ways to, you create it once and it produces results over and over and over, almost
mhm,
like planting a fruit tree, right?
mhm,
You
mhm,
plant that tree and then let it produce fruit over and over and over. So the biggest mistake that most podcasters make is that they spend too much time doing things that don't produce results over and over and over and over when it comes to growing your audience. They spend,
mhm.
and I can give you a big, probably everybody on here would guess it. The biggest thing that they do is they all go all in on social media. because
Mm-hmm.
it feels productive, because it's busy. You're posting
Mm-hmm.
and posting and posting. But guess what? When you're on, let's say, Facebook, and you find yourself scrolling, 90% of the time, you're just scrolling. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So why do you expect your podcast listeners to go from
Yeah.
Facebook, from Instagram to Twitter to your podcast?
Yeah.
Right. So instead, we did social media, but it was probably like 20%, 15 to 20%. We
Mm-hmm.
focused on creating evergreen strategies,
Mm-hmm.
right? Things that would produce over and over and over again that we could create once. We focused on being proactive, figuring out who our dream client was, and going out and putting our podcast in front of them, because anybody can find your podcast. But as a business owner, you want the right people listening to your
Mm-hmm.
podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So we were very proactive. One of the ways we did it was podcast guesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? If they're listening to a podcast, they've already raised their hand and say, I like to listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
But the second part is that podcast episode will live out there and produce fruit over and over and over. And you only have to do it once,
Yeah.
but you need to be strategic about it.
Yeah.
And the second part was, we did content. We did like written content, because I came from a content strategy place. So we would go out and create art, which now is like amazingly easy with AI. Back then, we were doing it the old fashioned way, right? Humans. But we would create content on places like LinkedIn, like blog posts, not just the newsfeed content, but articles, and where we knew our dream clients were hanging out. But instead of putting a link to the show, we'd actually embed the podcast player so they could listen right there. But we had a specific strategy to get them to listen. So those were two ways that we did it. But if you think about it over time, I like to use the analogy. Those that can see this could see this, but if you can't, I've got a glass in my hand with water, right? If you do social media, it's like having like a styrofoam cup in your hand that has holes in it, and you're pouring water in it, never filling it up. But our strategies for podcast growth, when they hit the top of the glass, the water has nowhere to go. It just starts overflowing. It creates an abundance of listeners. So once you hit that tipping point, you are just getting listeners all the time from all these locations all these fruit trees that you've planted all over the internet are now producing fruit. That the fruit of that for you is a bigger audience. And then once you have that big audience, if you have a way in place to move that person from listener to lead, and then from lead to community to client, the game's over. But it's all, like you mentioned, it's the important thing. And I'm glad you asked me this, is starting with the audience first and growing that audience the right way.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, because I think like that is like when we're doing a podcast, like I started mine and I always said, if it changes one person's life, my mission is done. And you probably want to reach more than one person. And so this is why I was also asking you this. And I think a lot of people who have a podcast, this is the big question: how can I reach more people? And so thank you very much for sharing this with us.
Real quick, can I share one thing just to give your people a little bit of shift? You don't have to have a super large audience, right? You can have if you do this the right way, where you're very proactive about bringing the right people over into your world to listen, and then you acknowledge them, you let them know they're seen, heard, and listened to. Make them a part of the experience. And when you do that, they feel like not only is it your podcast, it's sort of their podcast too, right? And they want to share it with others, and they want to stick around, and they're not going to leave. They're going to keep listening. That's a great way to grow your show. And it creates a highly engaged audience that then becomes like your biggest evangelist and also your biggest clients as well. So don't forget about taking care of your audience that you have, and treat them like humans.
Yeah, I think it's refreshing that we don't all have to become Joe Rogan, right? And that's actually, and I think Pat Flynn said that too. Is like there is beauty in when you're still small, because you can serve your listeners or your clients so much more personally and so much more attention to detail. Yeah, so I love that you said that we don't all need to have this huge audience, that we can really build something beautiful and serving people, like your last step, serve people, that comes from some small but quality service or product. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, or share with us, where should people go find you if they're now intrigued and they have a podcast, they want to know how you could help them grow their podcast or do this podcast ATM? Where would you where should I send them, my audience?
I would say, the thing that I'm really having fun with now, and that seems to be connecting with a lot of people, because in the past I've got very like more expensive type programs that are, but I want to serve more people. So I started something new called Podcast Profit School. And it's a membership, but it's got so much value. It's got a really cool collaborative group of people. Like some of the people in the group that signed up to be members are now going to come teach and share some of their superpowers. So, but throughout the whole process, the whole goal is to help you grow an audience, get more leads, get more sales for your business, but do it in a fun, collaborative environment with a lot of other really cool people. So it's a really cool, tight community and membership. So I would say that that's the best place. If they want to learn more, they can go to just podcastprofitschool.com and check that out. And then you can find me all over the place if you just look me up online and come say hey. But I would say start there if you're a business owner with a podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I will for sure put the link to that in the show notes and also some other social media links so that they can reach out or wherever they want to. So before we end here, I wanted to ask this all my guests. Did I not ask something that you think needs to be said before we end?
I don't think you did. It was a great conversation, but I would share this is that this is something that I share all the time to people is, I used to be someone, you may not be able to believe it now if you're hearing me or seeing me now, that didn't share, didn't speak out, didn't believe that they had something that other people could, have their lives changed by. And I would just share with everybody. It doesn't matter if you start a podcast, if you just decide to jump on Facebook and do one Facebook Live, whatever it is, believe in yourself and step into that, because every person has a unique talent, a unique ability. And you mentioned this earlier, and I think this is very important, that even if you just have the courage to share once and it changes one person's life, was it not worth it? So that's what I would share with everybody is like, just you've got a message and a mission within you and something that's ready to come out, and you're unique, and get out there and put it out there, because the right people will come to you and they will be called to be a part of whatever you put together.
Thank you so much, Evans, for coming on and sharing all your wisdom with us and being so open to share your struggles from chaos to peace. That was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Connie. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you. And I appreciate you.
Okay, my friend, that was part 2 of this insightful conversation with Evans Putman and his journey of how he had to step away from a successful business, which felt like chaos at the time, to focus more on himself, which brought more peace to his life and a lot more success to his business. Make sure you check out the show notes at connygraf.com/podcast-episodes. That is Conny Graf, ConnyGraf.com/podcast-episodes. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today and listening all the way to the end. If you found value in this episode, please share it with a family member, a friend, or a business bestie. Because if you find value in it, they will too. And sharing is caring. Have a beautiful and amazing week, and please subscribe so you never miss an episode. Talk to you next time. Take good care and be safe.